Jack walked down the narrow metal hallway of the ship, feeling the hum of the engines through his boots as soft blue lights flickered above him, and cold air whispered past the vents, making the silence feel heavier with each step he took toward her cabin. Wondering why she had called for him alone at this hour, without any notice or command, he reached her door and stood still for a second, looking at the strange, alien symbols glowing beside the panel, then took a breath and pressed his thumb against the scanner, waiting for a response that came in the form of a soft chime, and the door sliding open without a word spoken. Syra stood inside her quarters with her back to him, her long silver hair falling like moonlight over the smooth curve of her shoulders, and the soft glow of her cabin lights wrapping her in something that looked like calm but felt like danger waiting in the dark. "Come in," she said in a voice that was light but held something under it, something sharp like a knife wrapped in silk. Jack stepped into the room, and the door slid shut behind him with a click that echoed too loudly in the quiet space, and before he could speak or ask why she had summoned him, her hand moved quickly and pressed a button on the side wall, making the lock engage with a quiet final sound. She turned around slowly and smiled, not a soft smile, not a friendly one, but a smile that held secrets, a grin that told him she knew something he didn't, and she planned to keep him in that room until he did. To Jack, looked at her eyes, strange and glowing, like pale stars with a color that never stayed the same, and he felt the air grow thick around them, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. "Why am I here?" he asked, trying to sound calm, trying to keep his hands from twitching, but Syra only walked closer to him with silent steps, like she wasn't touching the floor at all, and she tilted her head, watching him the way a hunter watches something that moves just before the trap springs. "You are here because you are curious," she said, "and because I chose you before anyone else noticed what you are, before they decided what you are not." That made Jack blink, because her words didn't make sense. "Not yet." And the way she looked at him made his chest feel tight, like he was standing on the edge of something deep and cold, with no bottom he could see. She walked past him and waved her hand, and the wall behind her shimmered, showing a strange, glowing map. Lines that bent in ways that didn't follow the laws of physics, and stars that weren't on any chart he had ever seen. Jack stepped closer to look, and the lights danced in patterns that made his skin crawl, but also drew him in, like music only his bones could hear. "What is this?" he asked, but she didn't answer right away. She stood beside him close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence, and she pointed to one spot on the map. "A black dot wrapped in red circles, pulsing like a heartbeat. That is where we are going," she said, "though no one on this ship knows it, not the captain, not the crew, not even the command center back on the station, because the route was placed in secret, hidden deep in the system, and only now does it begin to wake." Jack turned to her and asked who did this and why, but her smile faded then, and she looked older, like she was remembering something painful, something buried far away. "I served on another ship once," she said, "a warship that vanished. In the dark, it was never spoken of again. We found something near those stars, something that changed us, and only I returned." Jack didn't know what to say, because this was not just a story, it was a warning, and he could feel it in the way her voice shook, and her eyes no longer glowed. "They think I am broken," she said, "but I am not. I am changed, and so will you be if you stay, if you listen, if you follow what waits at those coordinates." Jack stepped back and looked at the locked door, then back at her and asked, "Why tell me all this now?" "Because they will come for you," she said, "because you looked at the wrong file and asked the wrong questions, and because something out there heard you." And now it watches. A chill ran down his spine as he remembered the flicker on his terminal yesterday, the one he thought was a glitch, but now seemed like something else, something with purpose. The door stayed closed, the map glowed softly, and Cyrus stood still as the ship moved through space, on a path no one knew, and Jack realized that nothing about this visit was random, not her message, not her smile, and definitely not the door that clicked shut behind him. Not when it was just the two of them, and her grin held the start of something. Far from safe, far from known, far from human. Jack could not sleep that night. The glow of the alien map stayed in his mind, like fire behind his eyes, and the sound of the door locking echoed again and again. Like a soft warning, he could not shake. The ship hummed around him, steady and calm, as if nothing was wrong, but he felt the change deep in his chest, like the pressure before a storm. Something was moving, and it was not just the ship. He stared at his ceiling in the dark, wondering if Syra had told him the truth, or if it was all some game, some alien test, some strange way to pass the time between stars. But her eyes had not lied, and her voice had not trembled like someone pretending. In the early hours of the next cycle, he went back to the control room alone, the lights dimmed low, and most of the crew still asleep or off duty, and he sat down at his private terminal with shaking fingers. He opened the nav logs, not the public ones, the restricted ones, the hidden files he was not supposed to touch, and entered the code Syra had whispered to him before he left her cabin. The one she said would show him the path. That first nothing changed. The map looked the same, plain and normal, but then a shimmer ran through it like a ripple across water, and new lines appeared, red and gold, like veins across the stars. They moved toward a point far beyond their mission path, far beyond any station or colony, and Jack felt his breath catch as the name of the system appeared in symbols he could not read. He leaned closer and saw a date next to the coordinates, a launch record from a ship long missing, its ID scrambled but familiar, something he had seen once in old records. During his training, he blinked and pulled up the file, but it was blocked, marked as sealed by High Command, and protected by warning tags that made his blood run cold. He closed the screen and stood up too fast, the room spinning for a second, as if the stars themselves had tilted. Then he heard it, a sound so soft it might have been his mind playing tricks, a voice behind the walls whispering his name. Not loud, not angry, but curious, like a question reaching through metal and space. Jack backed away from the terminal and turned toward the door, ready to run, but it slid open before he touched it, and Syra stood there, calm and quiet, her eyes glowing. Agona, told you not to look yet, she said, but her voice held no anger, only concern, as if she expected this, as if she knew he could not resist. Asked her what it meant, why the map was hidden, and what those symbols on the screen were, and she stepped into the room and touched the console with a soft gesture. The files shifted and opened under her hand, showing layers of data and strange codes that moved like living things across the screen, and she pointed to a string of numbers. This is what they fear, she said, a pattern that repeats every time someone finds that place, every time a ship draws near. The signal starts again, and something wakes. He stared at the numbers, confused, but then Syra showed him something else, a piece of video. A broken log from a mission report years old, and filled with static. It showed a figure in the dark, walking toward a glowing shape, something huge and floating, something that turned as if it saw the camera, and then the feed cut to black. Jack asked her if this was real, and she nodded slowly, saying it was the last image from her old crew, the ones who never returned. She leaned close and said softly that she believed the thing in the video was not a creature, not a weapon, but a mind, something lost or waiting or trapped, something that reached out. Two thoughts: it could touch across the stars, and now it had touched him. Jack felt a cold chill in his chest, as if something far away had looked at him for the first time, and now would not look away. He asked her what it wanted, and she only said she did not know, not yet, not fully, but it had spoken to her once, through dreams, through voices that were not her own, and it had promised to open a door no one else could walk through. Jack whispered that he was not ready, that this was not what he signed up for, but Cyrus smiled then, and said, none of us are, but some are chosen anyway. The lights in the control room flickered once, and then returned to normal, and the stars outside the window seemed to pulse brighter for a second before fading. Jack looked back at the screen, at the glowing path stretching across the void, and he knew the ship. It was already turning, even if no one else noticed it. Yet he looked at Syra, and asked what happened if they kept going, what happened if they reached the place on that map, and her answer was simple then: the stars will no longer be silent, and we will no longer be just human. The door closed behind them without a sound, as the ship moved slowly toward the unknown, and Jack knew this journey would not end the way anyone had planned it. The ship moved through space like a ghost, no alarms, no warnings, no sign that anything was wrong, but Jack felt the change in his bones, like something pressing against him from all sides. Even though the walls looked the same, and the stars outside stayed still, he walked down the corridor holding a repair tablet in one hand, pretending he was just checking systems like always, but every step felt watched, as if eyes were behind every vent, and every shadow waited for something to slip. Syra had not spoken to him since showing the files. She said to wait, she said to listen, and he did. But what he heard now was worse than silence. It was a whisper, soft and strange, coming from inside the walls, calling his name in a voice that was not hers, and not his own either. He froze near the power junction, the sound behind the panel like breath, or static, or both, and he leaned closer just a bit, because he had to know if it was real or if his mind was folding under fear. Jack, he heard again, this time like it was inside his head, but he knew the sound came from the vent above him, and the air felt cold, like ice had formed in the wires. He stepped back, heart pounding, and nearly dropped the tablet, as footsteps echoed behind him, fast and sharp, like someone running on metal. But when he turned, the hallway was empty and quiet again. Jack walked fast to his quarters, locking the door behind him, and checked the logs on his panel. No alerts, no motion, no sound recorded, even though he knew what he heard was real. He sat down, breathing hard, and opened the private channel to Syra, only typing, not speaking, because his voice felt too tight. Whispered again, he wrote, and after a long pause she answered. Do not answer it, she wrote back, and nothing. More he stared at her message for a long time before deleting it and closing the terminal, then looked down to see a thin silver object on the floor near his bunk. Something small and sharp and shaped like a feather. He picked it up and felt heat in his fingers, even though it looked cold and smooth, and the moment he touched it, he saw something flash in his mind. A shape floating in the dark, wrapped in mist and light, with no eyes, no face, just feeling, just hunger. He dropped the feather and it vanished before hitting the floor, like it had never been there at all. Jack backed into the corner of the room, trying to calm his breath, and then the intercom crackled loud and strange, like it was struggling to speak, and Syra's voice came through clear and calmed. "Me in cargo 3 now." The channel cut before he could answer, and the lights flickered once long and slow like the ship itself. Agreed. He found her waiting near a sealed crate with red warning signs, and she was not smiling. This time her eyes focused, and her skin pale like something had taken more than sleep from her. "You saw it," she said, not asking but knowing, and he nodded slowly, not wanting to say it out loud. She opened the crate, and inside was a small black cube with blue lines pulsing across its surface, and she picked it up with both hands like it was something holy, or cursed, or both. "This is a memory lock," she said, "from my last ship. It holds recordings locked behind code, too dangerous to play unless someone touches it." "Someone?" Mark Jack asked if she meant him, and she nodded again, then placed the cube in his hands and stepped back. It felt heavy, not in weight, but in thought, and the moment he touched it, the blue lines brightened, and the cube opened, showing a floating image above it. They saw a corridor broken and burning, and a crew member running from something unseen, shadows swallowing light, and screams without faces. And then the image shifted to show the stars and a ship drifting toward a red moon where the mist curled like fingers pulling it in. The final image was a man standing still as lights rose around him. Not flames, not weapons, but something older, something watching. The feed ended, and the cube went dark again, and Jack stood frozen, unable to speak for a long time. "That is what waits," Syra said softly, "and it has seen you now just like it saw me, and just like me, it will not forget." Jack asked what happened to the rest of her crew, and she said nothing, just looked at the floor and turned away. They walked in silence back toward their sections, and Jack felt the air grow thicker with each turn of the corridor, as if the ship was shifting or listening or breathing. Before he entered his room, he heard it again, the whisper behind the vent, this time softer, this time more patient, this time saying one word again and again, "Come." He shut the door fast and leaned against it, eyes wide as the lights flickered again, and the whisper faded. Like a dream, like a memory, like something waiting for the right time to return. The lights went out without warning, just a blink, and the ship was dark. No hum, no sound, just cold silence stretching through every corridor. Like a hand closing around the heart of the crew. Jack froze in his bed, fingers wrapped around the blanket as shadows took over, and every small breath sounded loud and heavy like thunder in a cave. He reached for his panel, but it was dead. No signal, no power, and the backup lights did not come on as they should. Like the entire system was not broken, but paused, waiting for something to pass outside his door. He heard movement, not footsteps, but something slower, like dragging something heavy across the floor, and he waited for it to pass, but it did not. It stopped near his door and stayed there, breathing like metal and steamed. Then it was gone, and the lights came back on, pale and flickering like a dying candle, and his panel rebooted with a soft beep, but the screen showed a warning he had never seen before. Not in training, not in manuals to crew members, not responding, not reporting, not located. Jack stood and checked the ship logs and found the section where they vanished during the blackout. The cameras showed static, and then only missed a strange white fog rolling down the hallway before the feed cut out. He closed the logs fast and left his quarters, walking toward engineering, where Syra had told him to meet her in case something like this happened. When he arrived, she was already there, holding a small scanner in one hand and a glowing piece of tech in the other, and her face was tight with worry, not fear, just readiness, like she had seen this too many times before. "It has started," she said, not looking at him. "The core shut down by itself, and we lost contact with the others near Sector 9. Jack asked if they were dead, but she only shook her head and said not dead. Just taken. She handed him the glowing device and said it was a filter, something that would show what normal eyes could not see, and when he held it up to the vents, he saw the mist again curling inside like it was alive. He asked what it was, and Syra replied that it was memory, not gas, not vapor, but something pulled from minds, something that showed fear, like pictures on glass. She led him to a locked chamber near the core, something not on the ship map, something hidden behind old metal and sealed codes, and when they opened it, they found a control panel no one was supposed to touch. She said this was from the ship she had lost before, salvaged and placed here by command, who thought it was dead, but it was not dead, just waiting for someone to activate it. They watched the panel light up with strange symbols, like stars and roots, and then a voice filled the room. Low and deep, not human, not angry, just curious. The same voice Jack had heard behind the walls, now louder now. Awake Sierra stepped back and whispered that it had chosen to speak, and they must not lie. Because it would know it always knows, the voice asked. One question repeated again and again, in a language Jack did not know, yet understood well. You see, Jack answered yes before thinking, and the panel showed. A new map, a place with no name, with moons cracked like eggs and ships floating like bonesy. Felt pain in his head, but it passed fast, like something pulled memories out and left. Strange thoughts behind, like Echo Syra, watched him and said softly that the thing behind the mist was once a builder of stars. Now broken, now dreaming, now searching for voices to follow. He asked if it wanted to harm them, but she said no, it did not want harm, it wanted eyes. It wanted thoughts, it wanted them to carry its dream forward. Jack said he was just an engineer, not a messenger, not a tool, not someone to carry alien dreams, but she smiled then, for the first time since the lights died, and told him the dream had already started, and now it lived in him to be, for he could answer. The alarms went off. Not loud, but slow like a heartbeat, and the main ship voice announced that another crew member was Gunsira, grabbed the filter, and said they must go to the top deck, where the fog would rise next, where the ship's heart would be touched. Again as they ran through the halls, Jack looked at the walls, and saw faces for just a second, faces of the lost crew, fading into the metal, watching him with empty eyes full of stars. He blinked and they were gone, and he kept running, and behind him the ship whispered once more, but this time the voice was not alone. It was joined by something deeper, something older, something that now knew his name, and would never forget it again. Jack woke with a start and felt the change before he even opened his eyes. The way the ship moved was not the same. No more steady path, no more planned turns, just a slow drift that felt like something else was steering, something not human. He opened the nav panel near his bunk and saw stars he did not recognize glowing in strange patterns, and the path line on the screen was new, not from the mission, not from command. Just a long curve leading toward a dark part of space marked only by numbers. No name, no beacon, no return line. The ship was off course, and no one said a word. Jack ran to the main control room where the others were gathered. Some shouting, some whispering, and the captain stood stiff and pale watching the screen as the new route locked itself in place with no command code used, no hand given, no override allowed. Who changed the path? The captain shouted. But no one answered because they all saw the same thing. The ship had turned by itself, and the engines were locked. Sierra stood at the back, her eyes glowing just a little, and she looked at Jack, not with fear, but with something else, something like warning, something like truth. Jack pushed through the others and stepped beside her, asking if this was what she meant, if the map had woken, and she nodded, slow like a dream, nodding in its sleep. It chose the time, she whispered, and now it chose the way. Not a road, but a memory, a path from thought, not from space. The crew argued about pulling power, cutting the engines, forcing a stop, but nothing worked because the ship itself refused, and the systems ran as if in a trance, all working, all clean. Just no control given back. Jack asked Syra what waited at the end, and she showed him the old cube, again now glowing brighter, now hot in her hands, and she said softly, the answer waits, where the voice was born, where it first reached out, and no one answered. The screen showed a world ahead, a planet, not on any star map, covered in mist, and surrounded by broken machines like rings, like floating bones, and Jack felt his breath stop for a second, as the name appeared on the screen, not in letters but in feeling home. It said inside his head, and he knew. It was not his voice saying it. Syra touched his arm, and said the dreams will grow stronger now, and they must not sleep without guarding their thoughts, because the voice learns faster when minds are quiet. That night, Jack did not sleep. He sat on his bunk, staring at the wall, and heard the soft whisper behind it, not like before, not calling his name now. It spoke in images. Now it showed him places. He had never been, places filled with light, and towers, and things that moved without walking, things that floated through air, like fish in water. He saw himself standing in a hall of mirrors, but the mirrors showed stars, and behind him stood a figure made of light and dust and sorrow. He woke from the vision with sweat on his skin, and the faint sound of music still in his ears, music that came from no instrument, just from memory that was not his. He went to the observation deck and found Syra there watching the stars twist and bend as the ship moved through currents that looked like space but felt like thought. She told him the voice came to her the same way, first images, then sounds, then feeling, and finally names, and now it would ask him to ask what he wanted, ask what he feared, ask what he feared, ask what he would give. Jack said he had nothing to give, no power, no gift, no promise, and she said that was why it chose came because only empty hands can carry what others fear. They stood together in silence, watching the dark world grow closer, and the ship lights flickered like breath, and the crew grew quiet like sleep. But not peace, just waiting. The captain called a meeting and said if they reached the planet and could not break course, they would send a small team to scan it from orbit, just one shuttle. Just long enough to map and return. Jack volunteered before anyone else could speak, and the captain nodded. Slow and confused, like he did not know why he said yes. Sierra stepped forward too, and said she would go, and no one stopped her because her eyes did not look like they once did. Now they held color that changed like stars, and no one dared ask what she really was. Now later Jack asked her again what the voice wanted, and she said the same thing. It always wanted someone to see, someone to hear, someone to carry what was left of a world that never finished speaking. As the ship fell into orbit around the silent planet, Jack felt the air around him change the same way it had in the dream, and Syra whispered one word beside him, not a name, not a place. Just a promise soon. The shuttle doors opened with a slow hiss, and Jack felt the air around him grow heavy, not with heat or gravity, but with something strange, something that made his breath feel thick and slow, like the world outside was not just a place but a presence watching him from every shadow. He looked at Syra as she stepped onto the surface, her boots sinking slightly into the soft black ground, and her eyes scanning the thick white mist that curled through the air like smoke, with no fire, and he followed her slowly, gripping the scanner in one hand and the small memory cube in the other. The sky above them was dark, not with night, but with clouds that did not move and light that came from nowhere and everywhere at once, and the air hummed like music too low to hear, but strong enough to feel inside the bones. Jack asked if this was where her last ship came, and Syra nodded, eyes forward, and said this is where they vanished, not all at once, not with a scream. Just step by step, like fading into the dream of something older than stars. They walked through the mist and saw shapes in the distance, tall and thin like towers or trees or bones rising from the earth, and Jack felt each one watching without eyes and breathing without sound. The scanner flickered useless, no readings, no temperature, no signal, just blank white and pulsing blue, and he turned it off because it only made the fear worse. Syra stopped near a fallen structure, something broken, something built not by hands but by thought, and she touched the smooth surface which lit up at her touch, showing symbols that shimmered and changed like words in a dream. This is not a ruin, she said, this is memory, and it lived still, waiting for a voice to answer what was never finished. Jack stepped closer and saw images appear on the wall, not pictures, not videos, but shapes made of light and emotion, showing people, not humans, standing before something huge and glowing, with arms raised in welcome or in surrender. He could not tell then. The image changed to show one figure standing alone, wrapped in light, and surrounded by the broken forms of the others, and Jack turned away because the sadness in that image felt too heavy to carry. They moved again deeper into the mist, and reached a place where the air shimmered like water, and Cyrus said softly, "This is where they touched it the first time. This is where the voice truly spoke." Jack asked her what it said back then, and she paused for a long time before answering that it said nothing, with words only, with silence, and in that silence was everything they feared and everything they forgot. He asked her why she brought him here, and she looked at him, not with cold eyes, not with command, but with hope, and said, "Because it did not let me die, because it showed me something, and it waited for me to find one who could see it too." They stood still as the mist around them pulled away like a curtain, and a shape rose from the ground, tall and glowing, not solid, not smoke, just a presence with no face and no name, and Jack felt it press against his thoughts like wind against skinny, heard his own name inside his mind, not spoken, not called, just placed there like a hand resting on a shoulder. And then the presence reached out a limb of light and shadow, and touched his chest without touch. Memories filled him, not his own memories of stars being born and lost, of cities that floated in the sky, of beings made of flame and light falling into war over silence and peace. And Jack dropped to his knees, not from pain but from the weight of it. Also knelt beside him, whispering softly that it was only showing, not taking, not hurting, just remembering and sharing what had no place else to go. Jack asked what it wanted from him, and the answer came in a feeling, not in speech, a feeling of hands reaching out across time, asking not for power, not for worship, just for understanding. He stood slowly and said yes, not knowing what he agreed to, but knowing that he could not walk away. Not now, not ever, and the presence faded back into the mist, with no anger, no fear, just quiet and release. Syra touched his shoulder and said, "You felt it truly," and he nodded with tears in his eyes. Not from sadness, not from joy, just from something too big to name. They returned to the shuttle and looked back one last time, and the planet looked smaller now, like it had given something away, like it had let go of a burden long carried. They rose into the sky. The mist below shifted into a shape that looked like a smile, not cruel, not kind, just real and waiting, and then it was gone back on the ship. Jack stood in silence, watching the stars, and Syra said quietly, "The voice will not follow, but what it gave you will grow, and one day you will return, not by command, but by choice." Jack said nothing, because inside his heart a new light had begun to glow, soft and quiet like a seed waiting for time and stars, and he knew the dream was now his too. Jack sat alone in his quarters as the ship moved away from the strange world below, and even though the engines hummed and the lights flickered like before, everything felt different, like something inside the ship had changed, like something inside him had changed. Too, he looked at his reflection in the small mirror on the wall, and for a moment he thought he saw light behind his eyes, not bright, not burning, just soft like stars from far away, waiting to be seen. The crew did not speak to him. Much after he returned, they looked at him with quiet glances, and whispered when they thought he could not hear, and he did not blame them because he felt it too. He felt different, like he no longer belonged to just one world. Syra stood by him when no one else did, and she did not speak of the planet, or the voice, or the shape in the mist. She only said one thing, again and again: "It is not over," and he understood what she meant. Without needing more words, the captain tried to send a report to command, but the message bounced back with a strange code that none of them could break, and Jack knew it was not a system error, it was something else, something that did not want the story told. Just yet one night, Jack dreamed, and in the dream he stood in a field of silver grass under a sky filled with shapes that moved like whales through clouds, and a voice behind him whispered, "You said yes, and now you must carry." He turned in the dream and saw himself standing there, but older and calm, and glowing with soft lines running down his arms like rivers made of light, and his older self reached out and touched his shoulder, and said, "It will not be easy, but it will be needed." When he woke, his hands were shaking and the memory stayed sharp, like a real moment, like something already lived. Syra came to him later that day with a device he had never seen before, a small orb, with pulsing lines and soft hums, and she said the voice had left this behind, not on the planet, but in his mind, and now it was ready to show more. He touched the orb, and felt warmth spread through his chest, and then he saw new images, not memories this time, but visions of what could be cities that floated above oceans, and ships that moved through space, not with fuel, but with thought, and people standing together, not as enemies, but as listeners, and builders, and keepers of the light. He saw himself in these visions, not as a soldier, not as an engineer, but as something new, as someone who connected the voice with the worlds that forgot how to hear. Syra watched him without speaking, and when the vision ended, she said the voice chose long ago. It just waited for someone to reach back. He asked what it meant to be chosen, and she said it meant walking forward, even when the stars turned away, and speaking truth, even when no one believed, and carrying the dream like fire in the cold. The next day, the ship was approached by a vessel with no signal, no markings, and no crew that could be seen, and the scanners failed to read it, but the ship stopped beside them, and sent a message, not in sound, not in language, but in feel. In it said welcome, and Syra smiled. They boarded the vessel with caution, and found it filled with strange machines, and empty halls, and lights that flickered in patterns like songs, and Jack walked through it without fear because he knew this place. Somehow he had seen it in his dreams. At the center of the ship was a room with walls that moved like waves, and in the center was a seat, not a command chair, not a throne, just a place for someone to sit and listen. Jack sat down and closed his eyes, and the ship responded not with movement, but with memory. It showed him stars he had never seen, and places no human had touched, and it whispered again, "You carry what was lost. You remember what was forgotten. You will go where others cannot." When he opened his eyes, the lights of the ship followed him, like they knew him, and Syra bowed her head, not in worship, but in respect, and the vessel slowly powered up, and waited for his word. The crew watched from the main ship, as Jack and Syra stood together on the strange vessel, ready to leave, and the captain asked what they were doing, where they were going, and Jack answered with a voice that felt both young and ancient, "We are going where the dream leads, and where the voice still waits." The ship opened a gate in the stars, not a portal, not a tunnel, just a path made of memory and light, and as the vessel moved forward, Jack looked back one last time at the ship he once called home, and knew he would not return the same. If he returned at all, the stars ahead were bright and wide and waiting, and the voice inside him whispered one last word. Not a command, not a question, just a promise.